Hartery here with another episode of Presenting Champions. Today, joined by an absolutely legendary guest who I'm truly honored, truly blessed to have on the show today, Mr. Reggie Johnson, known as Sweet during his career, three-time world champion, never knocked out in his professional career, fought the very best fighters from around the world, so many big names that he shared the ring with, including but not limited to Roy Jones Jr., Antonio Tava, William Guthrie, George Castro twice, Lamar Parks, James Toney, of course, who I've also had on this show. Shout out to Lights Out, quite a few other big names. Today we're going to be talking about Reggie's legendary boxing career, which, as well as three titles that I mentioned: WBA middleweight, IBF light heavy, IBA light heavy, also challenged for WBA and WBC light heavy as well. Also won multiple national titles in there as well in the mix. NABF, USBA, light heavy titles and a few others. We're going to be talking about his legendary career. So the first thing for me to do, champ, is just once again say a massive thank you for taking time out of your day to speak with me and to speak with everyone watching this around the world. Thank you so much.
And thank you for sharing your platform with us. And when you mentioned all those great legendary champions that I shared the ring with, I just wanted to acknowledge one who's no longer with us. I also fought the great Julio Gonzalez, who passed away I think it's been about 5-6 years now.
Absolutely, yes. A legendary fighter and a great fighter on many levels. God rest him. I'm glad that you gave that a mention as well. And from what I hear of it, a very lovely individual as well during his time on this earth. So it's good to give him a shout out. Yeah, hopefully I haven't missed anyone else. I've actually got a full list here, but there's so many great names you were in there with, and we'll be getting into that today. But before we go back in time and we look back on your career and your biggest fights and everything of that nature, I think a lot of people would love to hear about what you're doing right now today in 2022, you know, some of the projects you're working on, what your life is like right now. I know you work with Hassan Hillard, by the way. I need to give him a shout out for being very helpful in setting this interview up as well, just to get that in there. But yes, please, champ, enlighten us on what your life is like now in 2022 and some of what you're working on these days, please.
Well, I got, I'm in quite a few places. Like right after I finish this interview with you, I'm taking off to the state of Louisiana, going to do 2 days of charity out there with up and coming boxers, with boxing related people. I tell most people that I'm a world activist where I'm here to help the people. I love helping people. I was taught to help people as a kid by the late Mr. James Carter, who helped me. And I remember him saying one day, he said, just like I'm here for you today, you have to be there for someone tomorrow. And that tomorrow is today. So I do a lot of charity stuff and do a lot of events, hang out with a lot of boxing fans. And, some of the things one of our biggest projects we're working on today, Team Johnson, is bringing fighters together, doing a Forever Champions World Tour. Well, these champions, this is pretty much what we do. We travel to different countries all over the world, here even in the U.S., and do charity and collaborate and meet and greet the boxing fans who really write our checks when they bell ring.
Absolutely. Well, it's some fantastic work that you're doing these days, and I love the fact that you're giving back. I know that's the type of person you are. It's wonderful work to see a champion, to see someone who reached the dizzy heights that you reached, giving back to people. That is fantastic. Now, you mentioned at the beginning, obviously Julio, who sadly passed away. I'm glad you mentioned that. On the subject of your former opponents, that you shared the ring with these many great legends, obviously a legend yourself. Do you keep in touch with many of them these days? You mentioned about bringing fighters together. Are there many of your ex-opponents that you speak to, that you're on good terms with, friends with, or anything of that nature?
Oh, absolutely. I was just a couple of weeks ago, I was just at the International Boxing Hall of Fame, and we do a lot of charity in that area, upstate New York, Wilmington, Delaware, Philadelphia, all in that Atlanta, all in that area. And one day uh, we had lunch with William Guthrie, who I fought and won the light heavyweight world title from. And yes, I love communicating, not only with the fighters that I fought, but just in general, just fighters, man. Even though we had to fight each other, uh, man, we still on the same team. I know that sounds a little awkward, but we're still on the same team. I mean, as far as putting business structure in place and coming together, making the sport better for the guys who go in there and fight and have their life and health on the line. So yeah, I love collaborating and talking to fighters that I fought and just boxers in general. Until we come together and say, listen, enough is enough. It's time to put some business structure together to take care of fighters like the NFL, the NBA, the National Baseball League, the Soccer League, and every other world league. We got to keep in mind, too, boxing is the first and world sport. Boxing is a world sport. It's a real sport. And we must take care of the guys who entertain us, and we must take care of the boxing fans who really write our checks.
Absolutely, absolutely. I love that. A very, very positive outlook. Absolutely fantastic. So, looking back on your boxing career itself, I mean, when I was researching for this, obviously I followed your career anyway, but when I was researching for this, trying to pick certain fights, I picked a couple of fights we can talk about. It's a shame we can't talk about them all, but we'll be here until next week because I'm sure there's a story about every single one. Looking back on it though, winning multiple world titles, challenging for world titles, being in there with the best of the best, everything that you've accomplished, words can't really do it justice. When you look back on your career now, having been retired a few years and so forth, do you have a moment that you're particularly the most proud of, maybe out of winning the different world titles? Maybe it's a different fight. It might be more than one moment. But I like to ask champions this because you don't always get the answers that you expect. It's not always the world title win. It's not always something obvious because it seems like an obvious question, but it's usually not. So when you look back on your career, your boxing career, do you have one fight or maybe more than one fight that you are the most proud of more than any other?
Oh yeah, I that's a good question, and I have a great answer, I think, for you. I look back and think about my first world title fight with James Lights Out Tony, who became one of the greatest fighters of our era. And like myself, I think James Tony is a fighter who could fight in any era because the way he fought. But that's a fight that till this day, in my heart, I thought I won. But him being champion, that was his second world title fight because he had went on to fight Michael Nunn, who I was the mandatory for, and they did a political thing and got fought Tony, and Tony came back and beat him. But you know that's a standout fight for me, even though it was a loss. It was my first fight, and let me tell you why it's a standout fight because, and it hurt me to my heart, but I had to go back to the gym, get my mindset, and come back and fight my way back to number one and fight for the world title again, in which I won it in my second try against Irish Steve Collins. So that'll always be a historic fight for me, the James Toney fight, because when you go out and set out to do something and do it, and in your mind and heart that you did it, but it didn't get to you, most people, I shouldn't say most people, some people, it would discourage them to say, man, I don't want to never feel like this again. I'm out of here. I'm not going to deal with this system. But, I was able to go back to the gym and fight my way back in a position to fight for the world title again. And I won it in my second try with Irish Steve Collins.
Yeah, absolutely. Both amazing fights. And I thought that the James Toney fight would come up at some point. So I'm glad we got there. As I mentioned, I've had him on this show, and it's really good to see him doing well these days as well, just to give that a mention. Okay, fantastic. So talking about that, it sort of opens up something that I plan to get on with a little later, but we'll get on with it now. We'll talk about your physical training, but Talking about the mental side of boxing at the elite level, obviously it takes a lot of discipline, it takes a lot of dedication. You have to have a strong mind as well as a strong body to make it at the high level. How would you mentally approach a big fight in terms of in fight week or maybe a few weeks out on the immediate build up? Would you be thinking about the fight all the time, sort of visualizing? Would you be just training and putting it out of your mind? I ask this because I feel that it's something that other boxers will know about, but fans really don't see this. They really don't see the highs and lows in the camp. They just see the fight. So hopefully, it will give us a little insight into something different. How would you mentally approach the biggest fights of your career when you look back on it now?
Well, when you get on a certain level in boxing, well, I can say that even as an amateur, I was a standout amateur. I lost in the Olympic trials in '84 to Frank Tate, who went on to win the gold medal in 1984 Olympics. The thing is just being passionate. And let me say this here, but it's not true in this day and time because I grew up and learned, even if they wasn't paying to see boxing, I would still be doing it. This is something that I love. And they say, if you're doing something that you love, it's not work, even though you had to put in the work to get in a position to be a standout in that sport or whatever you're doing. Boxing has been everything to me since the age of 12. The first day I put gloves on, the late Mr. James Carter told me, and he was my boxing coach, father figure, and told me, he said, young man, you can be champion of the world. And I grabbed that and held on to it. And, my whole world changed. So I can honestly say my career started at the age of 12 because I knew what I wanted to become. I knew what I wanted to invest my life in. And one thing about with boxing, like football, baseball, soccer, you have 10 teammates, and I have a team, but my team don't go out and protect me or play with me when that bell rings. You have to be totally focused. I think if you ask anybody, because I've heard this, even commentators talk about me being a gym rat. And when I first heard that, I'm like, I took that personal, man. What the hell is a gym rat? I know gym rat. And when they explained it to me, I'm like, yeah, I am a gym rat. I love putting in everything, and not only in my heart, but making sacrifices. Then when you get to a certain level, you have to go to training camps. I remember I had a fight with the guy in Argentina, and it got pushed back. And I was up in the mountains in the Big Bear, California, training, and I was just in that zone. I didn't want to stop it, so we did a deal to where we go back down to LA, back home for like 3 weeks. But you know what I did? Some of the sparring partners and some of the other trainers went down, but I didn't want to break that, and I stayed up in there and up in the mountains for like 3 weeks. So, and that's something that a gym rat would do. I was just so focused and had that mindset to go, hey man, no, I'm not breaking this. I love where I'm at right now, mentally, and I want to be at my best. 3 weeks is only 3 weeks. It's not even a whole month. But that's one of my stories to really explain to you what a gym rat is.
Absolutely, yeah, Jim Rat, 110%. Your dedication was always phenomenal, I would say, 110%. So it's a really, really good insight, and it's a really good lesson as well for up and coming boxers and fighters who are out there who want to achieve something in the game as well. Which again leads me to a question that again I was going to mention later on, but we'll mention it now. Is obviously given everything that you've achieved, you're in a prime position to give advice on basically ways to succeed in boxing. And I know this is a very big question, and we could kind of be here all day if we really got into it. But at the same time, if there was advice that you had to give, maybe one or two very very key ingredients to succeed in boxing, I'd like to get into that because with my show, there's a lot of young, like up and coming fighters who watch this all over the world, all different parts of the world, the US, over here in the UK, Europe, everywhere. So I think to take the opportunity to pass on just a little bit of your knowledge, a little bit of advice for them is very valuable and a very powerful thing. So, what would be just a couple of things that you would say are absolutely essential to succeed in boxing from your point of view, please, champ?
Well, once again, like I just mentioned a while ago about when that bell ring, you're carrying the torch. You are the torch. But before that bell ring, like any other thing you're doing, uh, you're only as strong as your team. Uh, I like to inspire people and let them know that things that I had to learn to get to where I got in the ultimate sport of boxing. You're only as strong as your team. You got to have good, solid people around you. Uh, Manuel Chato Robles, the late Manuel Chato Robles, who became my chief trainer, who was from Mexico. And this took place when I met him in 1988, was a great guy, and he was a great coach. And you got to have great people around you. Let me give you an example of one of the things. Chato was a good guy. He laughed, talked with you, this and that. But whenever somebody came around, Chato would always pull me to the side. Reggie, this guy, BS, man, no good. Be careful. No, he's no good. Whenever he did that, I always looked at that person or, find a way to, in a respectful way to, get away from that guy. No, we good, bro. We don't need you in this camp. You don't fit into this camp. So once again, I like to advise young men, boxers, up and coming boxers or boxers in general, that you're only as strong as your team. You got to have good people around you. I had a great cut man, the late uh, Chuck Bodak. And I think Chuck passed away. I think he's like 94, 95, but he was one of the greatest cut men of all time. Having guys like that, I had a former world champion also a couple of times, worked my corners, uh, and advising me, showing me stuff. And that all started with a great man, the late Mr. James Carter, who I aforementioned, who was my father figure and boxing coach. You're only as strong as your team. And uh, like Mr. Carter used to tell me, the two things. Now he didn't only told me, but he told all the fighters, young men. He said, "Introduce me to your friends, and I can predict your future." Think about that. That's powerful. And the second thing he said, uh, Reggie, just like I'm here for you today, you have to be there for someone tomorrow. And that tomorrow is today, because I'm not fighting now, but I love helping people, especially fighters that's trying to accomplish some of the things that I did, other great fighters have did. I only want the best for fighters, and that's why we're working on the Forever Champions World Tour, bringing fighters together, and we just gonna go collaborate with the boxing fans and take pictures with them, tell our stories, uh, and just hey man, thank them for writing our checks.
Absolutely. It is wonderful because, when I do these interviews, you're obviously very big on giving back, and I try and use these as a sort of a method of giving back, even if it's in a roundabout way, because people can learn from the wisdom of the great luminaries of boxing like yourself, the great legends. So moving on a little bit more with this side of things, and getting into it a little bit more. When it comes to key fights, we mentioned a little bit about James Toney, we've mentioned a little bit about Irish Steve Collins and some of those guys. I think that people will want to know about Roy Jones Jr. because I'm sure you get asked about this all of the time, and people probably bring this up whenever you go, I'd imagine. But at the same time, it's a great fight to get into. as a historical fight. So really, I'd just like to get into your memories about it. It's one of those things where I don't have a really narrow question about, a particular round or a particular thing, because you were the one who was in the ring, obviously not myself, so you're the one who has the memories and those things to share with us. So with that being said, anything that you'd like to share about your memories of the Roy Jones Jr. fight would be absolutely fantastic to hear about, if you don't mind sharing that.
Oh, absolutely. Normally when I do podcasts, interviews, that name always come up, and that name come up for a reason because he was the greatest fighter of our era. Uh, and once again, Roy is a fighter that probably could fight in any era. And people always ask me, "What was your best fight?" And they be expecting for me to say uh, Steve Collins, William Guthrie, the late Julio Gonzalez, those fights that I won world titles with. But I always say Roy Jones because it was a historic fight. It was a unification fight. I think when Roy and I fought, I think the light heavyweight division had been unified since uh, Michael Spinks. So, I always say that my favorite fight, I mean, of course, it was my biggest fight, was Roy Jones. I fought the best of our era. Um, and and I also explain something to people, and they get it when I explain it. I say, Roy Jones beat me. He beat Roy. I mean, I'm sorry, Roy Jones beat me. He beat James Toney. He beat a lot of guys. I say, but me and Tony, just like Tony got in the history that he beat me. Think about it. He Look what James Toney accomplished in boxing. Look what I accomplished. And then Roy being the best of our era, look what he accomplished. But think about this. I had 52 pro fights, 108 amateur fights. I never been knocked out. James Toney never been knocked out. But think about Roy, how great he was. And he experienced being knocked out, what, 4 or 5 times?
Oh, champ, you've muted yourself. Hold on a second. You've, there we go. Yeah, I lost you for a second there.
Okay, yeah, I got you. I'm back.
You're back with me, back with me. Yeah, no worries. It happens, it happens. Anyway, I'll just cut that out when we release this. But
Okay.
yeah, carry on with what you were saying. So yeah, he's experienced being knocked out a few times. That was at the point that you cut out. So carry on from what you were saying, please.
Right. And I just wanted to just show how great Roy was, how great James Toney was, even how great I was. I've been knocked down about 5 times. I mean, we all got a certain uh, role that we've played in the ultimate sport of boxing. But we all good, great, legendary fighters. But we all have our story, and that's why this Forever Champions bringing fighters together, doing documentaries, telling our stories. And man, this is bigger than a big fight. Just really knowing, because fight fans only see the pre-fight stuff, but they don't know the whole story of what a guy did to get it to his whole life, getting to that point of being able to fight for a world title, becoming a world champion. It's so many stories that need to be told, and we're going to jump on it and get that done.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's very good to get the stories out there. I've got to say, I mean, your life would make like a fantastic book or a fantastic movie as well. So one day, hopefully, they can look at something like that, which I think would come up as well. But it's really, really good material. And as I said before, we won't have time to get into every fight, but picking a few of them is key. And on that subject, obviously, with winning different world titles, as I mentioned at the beginning, challenging for them, and so on and so forth. specifically out of your world title wins, your world title defenses. Now I know we've talked about Roy, but out of the other ones, um, do you have any other favorites maybe that you regard to be the best defense, one of your best defenses of a world title, or one of your best world title wins? Obviously, William Guthrie was an incredible win. You know, with him leaving the ring on a stretcher and everything that went on there, quite a famous story now. But aside from Roy, what are your other favorite fights of your world title wins or your world title defenses, basically?
Well, that fight with Irish Steve Collins and that was, when you set out to do something and you're there, and like I said, that fight with Tony, I till this day in my heart, I felt I won that fight, and I consider that a political loss. But I was able to come back, position myself to fight for another world title, and beat another great fighter, Irish Steve Collins. And think about this: I beat Steve Collins for the world title, and then after he come back and win a couple of world titles. So he experienced that loss in a world title fight, and he come back and win two world titles. And I think he the only guy that can say that he beat Chris Eubank and now Nigel Ben, and he beat both of them twice, didn't he?
Yeah.
So when you look at my record and see that Steve Collins beat two great fighters like Eubanks and Nigel Ben, you gotta that's greatness in all of us.
Absolutely, yeah. It's good to give those a mention as well with some of your other world title wins,
Right.
and it is incredible. Everything you accomplished there, including the fact which I actually forgot to mention in the intro, that I believe throughout history only 8 men have won world titles at middleweight, then stepped up to light heavyweight and repeated that as well. And I should have said that at the beginning, but that's another fun fact. You've got these other great names in there who've managed to do that, including Sugar Ray Leonard, Thomas Hearns, Mike McCallum, and some of those guys. So that's not even a question. That's just something to get into, just to give that a mention as well. So we've talked about quite a bit so far, and we've actually gone into some very, very good material. One of the things that I wanted to touch on here was obviously some of the fights that didn't happen as well, because I'm a very positive guy. I like to look at the proudest moments of people's careers and the biggest fights. But with you, there were some fights that I know you've spoken very openly about, that you wanted, that you were aiming for, that didn't really come to pass for different reasons. So just to touch on those briefly, I don't want to dwell on anything negative, but it also needs to be said. What were some of the fights that during your career you were really aiming for that didn't end up happening for one reason or another, probably political reasons?
Well, I'm gonna start right here to mention the great another Johnson, Glenn Johnson, who knocked out Roy Jones. He and I were supposed to fight. The fight got pushed back, so he ended up fighting another fighter. And what I did, I called the late Julio Gonzalez, who had a win over the great Glenn Johnson. And I fought Julio. And I called Julio myself, got him on the phone, reached out to him because I knew his coach, uh, uh, who used to work with the people, the main group that I was with when I lived in California. Called him, got his number, called him. I said, Julio, we got a fight on what you call. We'd love for you to fight on the card. Are you interested? He said, yeah, well, who I'm going to fight? I said, you're going to fight me. He said, what? Why I'm going to fight you? I say, man, because there's going to be a world title fight. And keep in mind, when I lived in California, I used to spar with Julio. That's another thing. I fought fighters that I've had, even William Guthrie. I knew him before we fought because he and I were sparring with a guy who's getting ready to fight the guy in Russia, Darius Mikushevsky. And then, years go by and we had to fight each other. So he was in my hometown, and he and I were sparring with the guy who's getting ready to fight the guy in Russia. So what's his name? Darius Mikushevsky, I think it was. Yeah. And so that's the thing, man. There's so much history that people don't know, the boxing fan don't know, that leads to fight that they don't see that happens. Glenn Johnson is a fight that didn't happen that I didn't fight. Chris Eubanks, Nigel Ben, those names came up. Uh, Gerald McCullen, that fight came up. Man, it's a long list of fights that I didn't have that didn't, come to pass, that didn't happen. And this is why I always tell people, especially fighters, we don't, guys get up there and help these promoters promote these fights, but we don't really dictate who fight who. A promoter is just like an attorney, a lawyer for the most part. They sign a deal to do what's in your best interest, but at the end of the day, they're gonna always do what's in their best interest. And sometimes, some of them fair. They do what's in both uh, the attorney and their client's best interest. I understand that happens sometimes, and it's a good deal. But for the most part, in the ultimate sport of boxing, a promoter gonna always do what's in his best interest.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. It's a sad fact of the sport, and again, boxers will know, and other people involved, trainers and all the rest of it, but will know, the political side and lots of the dodgy dealings that go on. But again, the fans are not always privy to some of these behind the scenes occurrences, which is part of the reason for giving that a mention as well. So moving into the last couple of things, because we're coming up on the time I said.
Okay.
Length of this. It might go a little bit past that, but I won't take too much of your time anyway. Obviously, you mentioned about sparring as well, and you mentioned about some of the guys you sparred with, you then fought, and so forth. I'd like to touch on that because another thing that people don't see is that now over here in the UK, I work around a lot of gyms and in a lot of fight camps. I see people sparring, I see this, but the fans don't always get privy to this unless it is recorded and released for some reason. So in terms of some of your best sparring memories, it's a big question, I know, but who are some of the best people you sparred with? What are some of your fondest memories of that side of your career? And just anything that you'd like to mention of who stands out in that regard, please, champ.
Well, uh, I don't know if have you ever heard of John Scully? He fought for the 168-pound world title. John
Yeah.
Scully, I just found this here about a couple of months ago, and I was just reading some boxing stuff, and they was interviewing John Scully, and they asked John Scully what was the best sparring match he ever seen with two fighters sparring each other. And guess who he mentioned? He said, man, the best sparring match I ever seen was Reggie Johnson and Roy Jones. And back in the day, I was in Pensacola, and I was getting ready to fight in Pensacola. And I was, this is right before I signed with 3M Promotions. And we was sparring, me and Roy. I think we sparred about 3 times, and the whole gym quit working out and was watching us. And that's a good question you asked, and I had to bring that up. That was something that was just put out. John Scully said the best sparring match he ever seen was Reggie Johnson and Roy Jones, who later on they ended up fighting each other for the undisputed light heavyweight world title. So just think about the history of that. Just think about that. Me and this man sparred before, and that's when Roy even said before the fight, he said he did, he told his dad, no, we're gonna end up fighting. I don't want to be sparring this guy, Reggie, because we're gonna end up, he saw the big picture. And I saw the big picture too, because during that time I had so much more experience than Roy. I understood that, man, this is a talented young man. He's going to be a force to be reckoned with. And guess what? He was. He became probably the greatest fighter of our era.
Yeah. That's an amazing story, actually. That is incredible. I'm really glad we got to give that a mention as well. It sounds like it's good timing, if you've just heard that from John Scully as well. So, as I mentioned, moving into the last couple of things, one thing to address with your life outside of the ring, because, as I mentioned, I'm a positive guy and I like to touch on mostly on high points. There are a couple of low points. And I don't want to dwell on anything negative with this, so that's not the reason I'm bringing it up. But just to
Okay.
hear your side of the story, there was this thing that went on where you were accused of stealing money from like boxing camps and something like that, and there was like a legal case about it and what have you. And obviously, I don't know the ins and outs of it. I'm not sure if you know you got ripped off in some way and it sort of came back on you, or what happened there. But just to hear your side of it, as I mentioned, not to dwell on anything bad, but just to explain that, because I was quite surprised, hearing about that, because basically I'm sitting here looking you in the eye, and you seem like a great
Mhm.
individual. So it's one of those things where it's like, what was that all about? And again, I think the fans will want to know. So I'm just giving it the explanation as to why I'm bringing it up, not with any negativity, but just to hear
Oh no,
about.
no, this is nothing negative. This is the reality. Yeah, it's out there and it's written. Once again, like I say, just like in a boxing ring, we experience a whole bunch of positive things. We experience a whole bunch of negative things in life, and that was one of the negative things that I experienced. And till this day, me being from the cloth of Muhammad Ali, when that happened, I refused to sign papers to say that I was guilty because I was an innocent man, which led for me being locked up for 3 months, 6 days. I'm sorry, 3 years, 6 months, and 3 days. Until this day, I stand on that. And not only that, I even have the hard evidence in writing to prove that I was an innocent man.
Mm,
Uh, you're talking about a young man who grew up at a boys and girls club, uh, 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 who was brought up by people helping kids, and until today, I don't let that that really inspired me even more to go out and help the future of boxing, to help the future of kids or whatever they want to become. Uh, Reggie Johnson was an innocent man, and if I would have signed papers and said, "Okay, I'm guilty," of course I would have came home a lot earlier, but I refuse to do that. Once again, let me say this. I'm from the cloth of Muhammad Ali. That's my hero in and out the ring. Just like Ali took a stand, I was inspired by what he did way back then to likewise take a stand and say, hey, man, whatever come with this, hey, Ali say he was willing to die. And I was willing to die too. And, 3 years, 6 months, and 3 days out of my life. But, even with that being said and that's being out there, hey, I was an innocent man. And to anybody, whoever want to see the proof, it's easy. I mean, I show them the proof.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've got to say, and I wouldn't usually say it up front, but I'm just going to say it. I mean, 100%, I believe you on that, because I'm sitting here, looking you in the eye, and you're obviously the type of person who gives back and contributes to other people, and basically, cutting to the chase, you seem like a really nice guy, and you always have, and the way you've always conducted yourself, even during your career. There's so many things where this thing about stealing money, it just doesn't fit, man. I just thought, well, there's got to be some mismanagement there, or there's got to be somebody else who was involved, or whatever. So I'm just glad you got to give that a mention and clear that up, because you know what will happen. If I didn't mention it in here, I would release this, and then people would just start commenting and saying, hey, what about that case and all this. So I thought, well, okay, let's just hit it head on and hear your side of this.
And you know what? I mean, most guys want to be positive and not bring that up when I do interviews or podcasts or whatever. I don't mind bringing that up because it's reality. It's out there. You can go read that. But also, I can just like a boxing match, I can counterpunch that and knock that out by showing you something. That would prove that Reggie Johnson was an innocent man. And sometimes when you dealing with the system, sometimes you got to be smart enough to say, okay, that happened, but I need to just move on and leave that alone because I'm not in a position to beat the system. So you move on, but I'll never forget that, and I'll forever fight against that. And I've got hard evidence uh, uh, to show that I was an innocent man.
Mm. Well, I'm glad to hear it. I'm glad to hear there's evidence, and I'm glad to hear your side of the story. And yeah, I mean, it's true. I wasn't sure if to bring that up, and I thought, well, you know what? Let's just hear his thoughts on it. Let's
Right.
just hear your, and we've done that. So moving into the last couple of things, really, because we've gone slightly over time of what I said by about 5 minutes or something like that. One of the things I do want to mention here, just looking back on your career, is like the different locations you fought in, because again, this is something that people, well, some people talk about this, but I remember reading somewhere or hearing somewhere that you said that going to Argentina was one of your favorite locations to visit. I don't know if that's true, but I remember, I think I read something about that. And you fought in these different locations around the world. Do you have a favorite place that boxing has taken you? Because I know you're very much a people's person. You seem to sort of meet people, mingle with people wherever you go. So this could also lead into like where you received a warm welcome and what the people were like. But in your own words, champ, in terms of travels from boxing, are there any favorites there that stand out in your memory from your career?
Okay, I'll bring you up to speed on that. Of course, Argentina, even though every time I fought in Argentina, I received three losses. And that's three of my, I got seven losses, but four of them are political losses. And three of my political losses came from Argentina. I fought John David Jackson there when I lost the WBA world title. And then I go back two times to fight Jorge Castro from Argentina there. But let me tell you why I tell you that Argentina was one of my favorite, and till this day is one of my favorite experiences, because, like I said, we do charity. And not only me, my whole crew, the whole boxing team, coaches, all of us, we found something that was unique uh, in a not in a positive way, but like that's where all we went up, found in the mountains where all a lot of the poor people lives in the mountains, and I could just remember being up there with those people, and those people were kind of like, man, this guy he coming up here showing us, and I don't know if Castro ever spent any time up there with the poor people in the mountains. It was crazy because I had never experienced that. They put a lot of the poor people up in the mountains, and I can even remember driving up there and looking down without what you call, if this guy made the wrong turn to go down up the thing, we would have been out of here. But so that's one of the reasons why I said Argentina was one of my favorite places. But South Africa, I fought there during apartheid, and I was young then. Didn't have the experience I had from a business perspective, but just, being a young kid. I think I was 21, 22 years old when I fought in South Africa, and I stayed over there about, I think, a month and a half leading up to the fight. And I'll tell you something else that's a standout about that fight. When I flew from Houston, Texas to London, UK, I was on Pan Am Flight 103, the same flight that later on, I think a month and a half later, uh, crashed and killed all those people. So once again, think about that, man. That's part of the reality of my story. I was on that same flight, and I have those tickets somewhere amongst all my stuff. Pan Am Flight 103 flight. And when I tell people that, they be like, Reggie, get out of here, because I am a prankster. They say, Reggie, get the hell out of here, man. Don't do that. Don't be playing with that. I'm like, no, man, I was on that flight. And then I tell them a month and a half before it crashed and killed all those people. So, man, I can, just telling my life. I have so many stories to tell just from, the ultimate sport of boxing, where I started at age 12.
Yeah. Incredible. I didn't know that about the that flight and everything, but that is exceptional, and I believe that that's, I'm a believer that things like that are sort of meant to be. God's looking out for us and all the rest of it. People can make of that what
Absolutely.
people make of that what they will, but so moving into the last couple of things now, really, the last couple of things, because as I mentioned, we've gone slightly over time, so I don't mind that, but I don't want to take too much time out of your day. Last couple of things, obviously the subject of toughest fights and things like that comes up in pretty much every interview I do. It's a very fan friendly question. It's something that I get asked to talk about a lot, and we've touched on that with some of your, like the best fight with Roy Jones Jr. and this, that, and the other. But in terms of the fight that was the toughest for you, and tough can come in many forms. This can obviously be hardest hitter. It can also be like hand speed. It can be fights where there were things going on outside the ring that affected it. You know what I mean? It's not a linear thing of like the toughest fight. But At the same time, I think people will want to know because you were in there with a lot of the biggest and the best. Um, so, yeah, the second to last question is this one. What was your toughest fight of your career and why?
Well, I'm asked that all the time. The toughest fight uh, was the Roy Jones fight. Was a tough fight. He was the only guy that I couldn't, get to because of his ring generalship and his speed. But whenever I'm asked questions like that, I always mention the other fights like that falls in that category. But Roy being the best, uh, that fight with William Guthrie moving up two weight classes, that was a big challenge, and you know I ended up winning that in great fashion. But Lamar Parks, uh, that was also a very tough fight. And that was when I won the world title. That was my first title defense. And that guy, Lamar Parks, was forced to be reckoned with because he wasn't only a hard puncher, he had great speed. And like the two fights with Jorge Castro in Argentina, that guy was strong, man, but very strong. I mean, he's a devastating puncher as well. And then the other fight in Argentina with John David Jackson, who was left-handed, and man, it was like I was Reggie Johnson fighting Reggie Johnson. We both left-handed, and we both had the same mindset and the ring generalship of being smart, not taking a lot of punishment. And once again, that's also a fight I thought I won. And I know John David Jackson, after winning my world title, was supposed to go fight Jorge Castro, but he didn't go. And I think they stripped him. That's why I ended up going over there to fight Jorge Castro.
Yeah. So those
And
were the
those three fighters right there, those Roy Jones, Jorge Castro, and William Guthrie was a big guy, and that really worked in my favor. But that was a tough fight. I had to get kind of bold to send a message that, hey man, I ain't going nowhere. With this big guy. But I that is a standout fight for me right there, moving up two weight classes.
Yeah, William Guthrie as well, and it was an amazing win as well, the knockout, and such a decisive win for you. So
And
that's
that
all.
fight that fight was knockout of the year. I think,
Yes,
yeah, they tied up with Roy Jones knocking out Virgil Hill with that great body shot, and that was the knockout of the year,
yeah,
with William Guthrie.
absolutely. It was incredible. I mean, it was one of the all-time great knockouts, I think, and yeah, such a decisive win. As I mentioned, him leaving the ring on a stretcher and all that, everything about that fight. It was a great fight anyway, but the knockout was really something special. So moving into to the end of this, to sort of wrap this up with everything we've mentioned. One of the things I like to do at the end is just give a shout out to the fans around the world. I mean, you said about the fans being the ones who are, cashing the check or paying the check rather, and all of that side of things, and being the ones who support you and giving back to them. But in terms of fans of yours who are watching this or listening to this, and they've heard some great words of wisdom from you, they've heard some great stories from you, what would you say to the people around the world who have supported you during your career, and they continue to support you to this day? This is usually my last question because the sport is nothing without fans. At the end of the day, and I know we've sort of given that a mention, but just to give them a direct mention at the end of this interview, what would you say to your supporters around the world? What would be some words for them, please, champ?
Well, if it wasn't for the boxing fans, who would be writing our checks? Who would be sitting in that audience? Who would be making sacrifices to? Because I remember myself as a kid saving the money to go watch a fight downtown Houston, Texas, at the big stadium, the Astrodome. So it all starts with the boxing fans. And me personally, man, it's just like reaching out, helping people, especially kids. The boxing fans are I'm fans of the boxing fans. Let's put it like that, man. And I really understand who really write the checks at the end of the day. The fans are the one who write our checks. And man, they got great boxing fans on all different levels, even so many noted people. And look at how many women are into boxing when you show up at a big fight. If it wasn't for the boxing fans, I mean, there wouldn't be no ultimate fights or big events if it wasn't for the boxing fans. It all starts with the boxing fans.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's the reason I like to give them a quick mention because so many times with these interviews, people are so focused on the fight, and rightly so. But the fans, they build the sport, so I like to always give them a mention to close out. But Champ, we've got into some fantastic material here. I'm very very happy with this. I know there's always more we could have gone into it, and I had questions here about like your upbringing in the fit world and all different things. But we've got into some really, really good stuff, and hopefully we've got into a mix of things that people don't always hear about in like every boxing interview. I hope so. So the last thing for me to do is just to say once again, big, big thank you for your time. Big thank you for taking time out of your day to come on my show, Presenting Champions. Big thank you to Hassan as well for helping set this interview up, and it's been an absolute pleasure. I really, really appreciate you taking the time for this. Thank you very much.
Hey, and thank you very much. And I want to send a big shout out to Hassan, who set this up with you, who's this guy that handled a lot of business for me. Yeah, he's a great guy. And I also like to get Hassan to reach out to you and talk to you about. I think it'd be nice to have some of the great promoters and some of the great managers, especially the managers. As a matter of fact, I'm at one of my managers' home right now doing this interview with you, and he's like what 82, Bob Jordan. I'd like to mention him and man to maybe one day. The next time we do this here, we can have him join in and let him tell you some of his stories, what he experienced from a manager and a promoter's perspective. And he has some great fighters, even the great Mike Williams, who played in the Rocky V movie, Sherman Griffin, who was on the U.S. team, Eric Griffin, who was one of the greatest amateurs, and he turned pro with Bob Jordan, and I introduced him to Bob Jordan. So next time we do this, man, let's hear from one of the greatest managers / promoters of all time that a lot of boxing people don't even know, who's 83 and he's still rolling.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It would be a pleasure to have him on the show. Maybe both of you together on the show or anything like that, man. It would be absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to the Simply Inspired YouTube channel, and there'll be more videos coming soon.